Welcome to the MMA Nerd podcast. I'm your host, the MMA Nerd. It was so awesome to finally have fights again. We haven't had fights in forever. So it was good to finally get some fights going, watching some fights and having a good time. It was awesome. There's a lot of good fights on this card, so we're going to cover them. This is going to be my post-fight UFC 249 analysis. This is my first time doing a post-fight event because I haven't done a podcast before and after an event because of this pandemic. So I'm pretty excited for this. This last week's fight card was pretty damn entertaining, so I can't wait to get into it. There was a lot of fights, but like I said in the last podcast, I don't want to go too long on these podcasts just because I don't have obviously a lot of listeners and I don't want to waste a lot of time for you guys that are new listeners because I know it's hard to invest into a new podcast, and there's so many good podcasts out there. There's so much good content out there for MMA, so I don't want to keep too much of your time. I want to just kind of make it short and sweet, kind of go over some points, and then you guys can go and watch some other stuff like Joe Rogan's podcast or Luke Thomas's stuff or any awesome good podcasts out there. I'm not at that level yet. I'm still trying to work my way up there, just getting the reps in. And this is what a lot of this is for me, is just getting the reps in. And also, it is helping me because I'm studying the fights more and I'm having to rewatch the fights more, and then in return, I'm learning so much. So, this is just as much for me to learn as for you guys to listen. Let's start off with Donald Cerrone and Anthony Pettis. Now, like what I spoke about in the previous podcast, that Anthony Pettis likes to usually, when he's in the center of the octagon, keep his front hand up and his back hand towards his face, and he kind of parries with his forward hand and keeps that other hand kind of high for like check hooks and to parry when things come inside or to get ready for head kicks. Now, this time he didn't seem to adopt the same style. He seemed to have his hands lower, and that actually gave him more mobility, right? So if you think of guys that have low hands, let's say like a Connor, let's say like a Wonder Boy, a Lyoto Machida, Adesanya, there's guys that keep their hands low at times so that they have more mobility on their feet. He was looking to have more mobility in this fight, and it worked out pretty well for him. He wasn't really there for Donald Cerrone's jabs or kicks. He was very mobile, which was great because that also helped him not just break against the cage and just put his back against the cage. And what I talked about in the last podcast, that when he starts to break is when his back starts to go against the cage. When his feet go behind those two black lines, he doesn't do a great job at circling. He kind of just stays there, his back against the cage, just swings for the fences when it's really unfortunate because he has pretty good striking. And as we see here also, he has pretty great mobility, and the whole time he was able to just circle out from behind the black lines, and he never conformed to his usual cooperation to just allow himself to get backed up and go into this fight or flight response of shelling up and just winging shots. So it was really cool to see him adopt a more fleet of foot style and create more angles, and to also see a versatility of tools and attacks that he used. He used a lot more attacks. Usually he throws kicks, and on the same side he will then switch stance and then punch with his lead hand. But this time instead he opted for more attacks, and he was throwing really cool kicks like he used to do. He had way more tools. One thing he did do was his usual step back check hook, where let's say he's in a traditional stance and then he'll step back into southpaw and throw a check hook. Sometimes he does it double, where he's in orthodox, he'll step back into southpaw with a check hook, and then he'll step back again into traditional with another check hook. And it's pretty cool because he kept catching Donald Cerrone with that. And also, he did a good job with a shuffle check hook. So he'll just shuffle back and throw a check hook. Sometimes he'll shuffle back, check hook, then step back, check hook. So a lot of it was a lot of check hooks that he kept landing. One thing to look at was the fact that Donald Cerrone was able to take him down in the first two rounds. He couldn't do much with it, but on the downside, Anthony Pettis did get taken down with ease against Donald Cerrone. And obviously, I'm not saying Anthony Pettis is going to be fighting for the title anytime soon, but there's a clear indication there that if he did go against Khabib, that would be a serious issue because Donald Cerrone would just grab a single leg and take him down with ease. There was not a lot of chain wrestling going on, and Anthony Pettis, yes, he was able to get up, but he didn't get up in a way that was special. He just either got an underhook and got his guard back, or he just wall walked, posting his hands against the mat and tripoding up, using the cage to walk up. As we saw with Khabib, that's not a good solution to that Khabib problem where he wrist rides and he uses that base, your support of your hands, and he uses that against you. So seeing Pettis traditionally wall walk, which doesn't work against Habib, and getting an underhook and getting his guard back, which again, we'll have to see how that works against Habib. I don't see that really working against Habib. Now, again, he's not fighting for the title anytime soon. He's not fighting Habib anytime soon. Possibly, I don't know at this point. Things are so weird. Justin is now fighting for the title, so things do tend to change up in these weird times right now. But traditionally, he doesn't seem like he'll be fighting him anytime soon. But if he were, doesn't seem like a good matchup. It's common sense, right? It's we know this, but it's just something to look at and to observe. One thing though was when Pettis did stay right in front of Cerrone, Cerrone did a great job throwing teeps and using his jab. At one point, he actually caught Anthony Pettis in a pretty good head kick, which is really cool. It's hard not to root for Cerrone just because of his personality. Even the fight, he's so honest. When there's an eye poke or let's say a groin shot, he right away stops and he hugs the guy and he's just right away super apologetic. It's hard not to root for the guy. At the end of the fight, you saw Donald Cerrone being able to pressure Anthony Pettis and use great head movement, and he landed all these hooks and punches. It was great to see. It was actually the best I think Donald Cerrone has ever looked those last couple seconds. If he was able to just adopt that in his game, just he had that trigger in his game to just say, fuck it, use the head movement, get inside, really go in there with that footwork and launch some punches, dip in and out, and you saw it worked really well. He was really backing Anthony Pettis up. So if he did that more in his game and he had that more in him, I think he would be a lot more successful. And it would be cool to see him have that variety in his game because he's very much a pop shotter and a clincher at times. It would be cool to see him be able to really get in there with head movement and really have nice tight punches like he did at the last couple seconds of the fight. What's unfortunate about Donald Cerrone is that I believe he has a serious disconnect between his footwork and his hands, between his legs and his hands. His punches, they are just all arm, and his legs don't help generate power behind his punches, and they don't help him really create much distance either. He kind of just flicks punches out there, or he leans to his punches. He doesn't use his hips to really whip his punches out. That can probably be either a just issue of tight hips, or it can be a function of how much his elbows wing out when he punches. Think about it. If your elbows are tight to your ribs, when you rotate your torso, your elbow is going to move with your hips, with your rib cage, and it's going to be a lot easier to punch out at a nice linear path and have that good hip thrust into it where your shoulders go in at the end. There's a whipping motion. He doesn't have that. I think since his elbows kind of flare out, he has this disconnect with his rotation of his punches and they're timed odd. And if he was able to just have his footwork and have his legs generate the power into his hips and rotate with his shoulder, if he had that more, I think he would be a lot more successful in his fighting. Obviously, I'm not saying I will by any means beat up Donald Cerrone or say I have way better technique than him. It's just something I'm observing, and it would be cool for him to really work on that. This is late in his career. I don't know if he'll ever do that, but if he just did that and really refined his leg work with his punches, I think he would be a lot more successful. Now, on to Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. I was so looking forward to this matchup. The last couple of podcasts, I've been talking about how cool the matchup is between Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz. I talked about how cool it'd be to see a karate fighter would look against the neo-style footwork that Dominic Cruz does and other people like TJ and Gavin Tucker. Other people also do this, but those are just a couple of fighters that I can name off the top of my head. I talked about how both styles required you to come in linearly into them. If you come off at angles on both of them, it made it very difficult for them to use their footwork and to use their counters. Specifically, I said this with Henry Cejudo. Just like Conor McGregor, they need a linear path so that they can come back and then counter when the opponent is overreaching. What was really cool to see was that Henry Cejudo was able to get the linear strikes of Dominic Cruz and to counter him. The way he was able to get the linear attacks to come in was by every time Dominic Cruz stepped in. And every time Dominic Cruz tried to get an angle, all Henry Cejudo did was step out at an angle and then reset and face him straight on again to make sure that every time Dominic Cruz was facing him straight on, so that his attacks became more straight on. Not only was he able to force Dominic Cruz to fight him more linearly, he was able to back him up against the two black lines that I was talking about the last podcast. He was able to back him up pretty much with only feints. He wasn't really throwing any shots at all, and he just backed up Dominic Cruz the entire fight. Now, there were moments where Dominic Cruz was able to be the front runner, and when those moments happened, he looked great and he was able to really fire off shots on Henry Cejudo. Once Henry Cejudo did get Dominic Cruz behind the two black lines, things drastically changed, and from there he was just eating his legs up with leg kicks. The way he was able to do that was essentially back up Dominic Cruz until he was so close to the cage that he only had two outlets, which were his left and his right. From there, he became very predictable and he was able to just fire off leg kicks. It was really great game planning, and I think it's a shame if he really does retire because he adapts so well to his opponents. The game plans they bring into these fights are really good, and that was a really cool fight just to see how it played out. In regards to the finish, Henry Cejudo was looking for that head kick or the knee the entire fight every time Dominic Cruz would step in and then try to circle out. And it was really cool because the last combination that was thrown that they had, the exchange that they had, was a series of feints, and Cejudo was just clearly looking for the dip. And then once Dominic Cruz dipped, he fired off that knee or the head kick. Excellent game planning on their part and greatly executed. I do feel bad for Dominic Cruz. I do think the stoppage was pretty early. Not super early, but it was early. It could have kept going. It wasn't as bad as the TJ and Cejudo one. TJ fell a couple times. Dominic was still trying to get back to his feet. And yeah, so I thought it was pretty early. I can see why Dominic Cruz complained a lot at the end because it was an early stoppage and I would have loved to have seen the fight continue. I also wish Dominic Cruz, instead of complaining more, he could have made his point in the beginning, but then at the end, he could have then really campaigned for the vacant title, right? Because nobody has the title after this because Henry Cejudo is going to be retiring. Since it was an early stoppage, he could have campaigned for that. He could have said, man, this was an early stoppage. Give me the next title fight. Give me the next shot. I want to show everybody that I'm the best. But that didn't happen, so, Cruz is going to cruise, and he probably lost an opportunity there. He could have really campaigned for that. But if he's not going to get the next title shot, I don't know if we're ever going to see him fight for the title again. He's getting up there, and the injuries that he sustained throughout his career has really held him back, and I don't see him really progressing to a title shot. It would be cool to see it. It would be awesome to see it because of his style, and he creates so many cool matchups. But I guess time will tell, right? Now I'm obviously not going to go in order here because I'm going to talk about Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstruck, and that fight was really that fight was pretty funny. Not funny as in like I like seeing people get brain damage, but it was funny as in Ngannou had zero respect for this guy, and it looked pretty good for the first like second or two. It looked like they're gonna have a little kickboxing match, and Ngannou was like, "Fuck this," and went in there and charged with his chin up in the air and knocked this dude out. So nasty. It was so bad. It was bad as in the concussion was bad and the technique was bad. He just winged everything into those shots. He was not even looking at him. His head was just straight in the air. It was not the greatest technique, but it was scary as shit. It was so scary. Imagine that dude just running at you at full force and just throwing punches. It was pretty scary. Rosenstruck was stepping back and countering with hooks. They had no power behind them, and I think he got overwhelmed pretty fast. It's pretty scary to have Ngannou run at you like that, and I think he covers distance fast, and I didn't think he expected that as well too. But he did have nice fleet of footwork for those couple seconds before he got knocked out. If he had just a little more oomph into those check hooks, I think he would have he could have dropped him, he could have hit him, and anybody else that would have had a little somebody else that would have expected the bum rush and was able to really step back and counter with hooks or go for an underhook or get under all that and double leg him, I think it would have been bad for Ngannou. But that didn't happen, and he just steamrolled the guy, and it was scary as shit to see. Now, for the main event, Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. On the last podcast, I talked about how Justin Gaethje very well could be a really bad matchup. I really saw how his hooks can really sneak behind the long punches and the long jabs of Tony Ferguson. I also saw how the hooks can really be a factor when Tony blades his body. Tony Ferguson likes to blade his body from shots, right? So he will step back, just like I was saying with Anthony Pettis, he will step back into his other stance and blade his body and turn away. Dominic Cruz also does this in a different way. He does more of a shift, but he does do this motion. And Justin Gaethje was just able to capitalize on this. Not only was he able to capitalize on this, but he did a great job just keeping the same distance. He knew where he was at during the entire fight. He knew when he was in at jab range. He knew when he was at cross range. He knew when to use his head movement, when to shuffle in, when to shuffle out, when to L step, when to pivot. It was really interesting to see how much his boxing has improved. Now again, this is a bad matchup for Tony Ferguson. I really foresaw this being a bad matchup, and it sucks because the second they put this fight and I was studying it, I saw how we're going to lose the matchup between Khabib and Tony. And I would still love to see that fight, even if Justin Gaethje, let's say, wins against Khabib, which I don't really see that happening. Well, I can't say I don't see it happening because we've never seen Justin Gaethje go against a wrestler, and we've never seen him really wrestle, chain wrestle, or defensively wrestle chain wise. We haven't seen that. We just seen him down block and get front headlocks. We've seen that, and he does a really great job at that, but he doesn't really chain wrestle in the UFC. We haven't seen that yet. So it would be great to see that. But so that's a unknown factor here. But even let's say Justin Gaethje does win, I would love to see Tony Ferguson fight Khabib, or just at any point we have to see that fight. We have to see how Khabib's top positioning and his wrestling, how does that play against Tony's bottom game? And I'm going to be adamant about this that I do not think the solution for Khabib is Tony Ferguson's ground game, especially his guard. I don't see that. But it would still be great to have that down in the history books, to have that fight happen, even though it's past technically Tony's prime because we saw Tony just lose and Khabib hasn't. But it would still be great to see that because it would be, we need to see it. We got to see Tony's ground game and Khabib's top game, and we have to see how that will go. When the fight gets closer, I'll talk more about Justin and Khabib, and I'll do a lot of studying for that. And hopefully by then I'll be good at making videos so I can make a cool breakdown video for you guys. One thing I do think is that if somehow Justin Gaethje can stop the takedowns of Khabib, and this is a really obvious point, right? I'm not saying anything no one else can see or think about, but if Justin Gaethje can stop the takedowns of Khabib, Khabib will be having a hard time against Justin Gaethje because, man, Justin is just his understanding of distance and his footwork and his head movement. It's improved so much. It's amazing to see. He doesn't just stay in the pocket shelling up and then just throwing bombs over his guard. He's really managing his distance well and knowing what shots to throw and where to move his head, which angles to go to. It's great to see the progression, and that fight will be really cool to see. So yeah, guys, that was my post-fight analysis of UFC 249. And to be honest, having no crowd was pretty cool. The only thing I missed on the crowd was the cheering for the fighters once they did win. Like when Justin Gaethje won the title, the interim title, he couldn't really do a great promotional speech with the crowd roaring and having all that commotion and craziness. That is cool for promos and is cool for hype, and we can't have that now because there was no audience. But in the actual fight, not only hearing the cornermen during the fight and between the rounds super clear, we heard the shots, we heard talking between the fighters, we can hear them breathing whether they're tired or not. It was pretty crazy to just witness this era of fighting where just live to see and to hear and experience all this is really interesting and really cool for the fans now in this era of fans to experience this. And even though it's sad times and we're not doing well as a society, a lot of people have lost their jobs and we're stuck at home and mental health issues are at a rise right now, and that's all unfortunate. But for fighting, to see how we can experience fighting at a really pure state at this super high level. Usually we only see this in tough, but to see this against Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson and Cejudo and Cruz, it's crazy. And to see Ngannou like steamroll somebody in complete silence, to hear the punches, I wanted to almost turn the commentators off. I just wanted to hear the fighters. It was so wild. It was bizarre. But yeah, guys, so that concludes my podcast. And if you guys can, please like, subscribe, comment if you can. And thank you guys for listening. I appreciate this so much, and I love doing this. So take care, guys. Stay safe and be sexy.